Hey everyone, welcome to our virtual health panel. Pretty excited to talk to you today about some of the trends we're seeing in the healthcare space. Today's panel is brought to us by Sapling Financial, ACG, and Grata. And today, what we're going to talk about is we know that COVID has really accelerated the way that providers deliver care and has really tech enabled the healthcare space quite rapidly in 2020. So, looking into 2021, we want to explore how this is going to impact deal activity and M&A and potential opportunities for private equity firms and lower middle market investment funds. Now, what we're seeing in particular that we're going to dig into is telehealth and virtual care propagating throughout not just tech companies, but propagating into your independent clinics, hospitals, and other healthcare providers that have been so popular among private equity firms recently. Um, as a Before we get started, though, I want to give each of our distinguished panelists a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and their companies. So let's go around the room and let's start off with Rob Hong from Sapling Financial.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. So my firm is called Sapling Financial Consultants. We're a boutique financial modeling data analytics consulting firm. We've been working with ACG for about a year and a half now, and count a number of ACG members as clients in the private equity side. We've been working a decent amount in the healthcare space, and we've got a couple clients that are employing some degree of telehealth. So excited to share some of my thoughts on what they're seeing in the market and what we're seeing in terms of how telehealth can add value to potential transactions. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Rob. And Blake, you want to go next?
Yeah, so thanks. My name is Blake McKinney. I'm the co-founder and chief medical officer at Cirrus MD. We are a text-based telemedicine company. Background, I'm an emergency physician in Northern California. And about 8 years ago, I was noticing around the time my friends and family realized I'm a real doctor. I was a young doctor back then. They began to gain an interest. I'm the first doctor in my family, and everything became Ask Blake. So I observed the way they communicated with me, and what they never did was try to call me on FaceTime. They rarely called me on the phone. In fact, these people, my friends and family who had the best access to a doctor of anybody in society, would text me, and I found I was able to add value that way. And we looked around the market, and we found a lot of video visits and things like that, telephone calls with doctors for sale. And we decided, what if telemedicine were more than just a visit with a doctor? What if it was always on? What if it was like the experience my friends and family have, where a member, an employee, somebody with a benefit of membership can reach in their pocket, touch an app on their phone, and there's a doctor there to text with them. So we built the software starting in 2013 and started licensing that to healthcare organizations so they could stand up their own services. And that's going well today. Some of our largest clients include Kaiser Permanente and the VA, who licensed software from us. Then around 2017, we learned that large employers and health insurance companies wanted us to staff it ourselves. So at that point, I became the president of the Cirrus MD Provider Network, and we've built a nationwide 51 state licensed multi-specialty physician group, and we're staffing services that are 24/7, always on, with about a 30-second response time for companies like United Healthcare, several Blues, Aetna, and more recently, we've taken on the contract to provide physician services for the Target Corporation and their entire workforce. So that's the brief intro to Cirrus MD.
Thanks, Blake. And finally, our last panelist, Brett Larson.
Yeah, thanks, Nevin. My name is Brett Larson. I'm the CEO at eVisit. We're a virtual care platform that enables large health systems and provider networks to build their own telemedicine program internally using our technology. So the platform manages everything from patient intake, physician selection, all the way through to allowing a provider to diagnose, treat, and prescribe treatment. I started my career on the services side with a company that was acquired by Teladoc, and just recognized that there would be a need in the market for large health systems like Banner Health, Texas Health, and other provider networks like Envision and Concentra to be able to kind of roll their own telemedicine strategy using an enterprise architected platform that was consumer friendly and easy to use.
Thanks, Brett. So let's start off with some of the data that we're seeing before we jump into the questions. We're seeing telehealth and virtual care really taking over this market. There are over 100 hospitals that have really pivoted and started to focus on delivering care in a virtual way. There are actually over 50 Teladoc-like lookalikes of companies that are really virtual-only provider networks. And we see a lot of opportunity for consolidation in this space, as most of these companies are independently and still founder-owned. But one question that's really top of mind is, we've heard that telehealth isn't created equally and it varies across specialties. So we'd love to get your thoughts on which specialties of medicine you think are going to be most impacted by telemedicine and virtual care in the next 1 to 3 years.
Sure. I'll take a stab at that first. So, telemedicine means a lot of things. If you are a physician providing services in your clinic, what you know is that depending on what your specialty is, a lot can be handled remotely. If you are family medicine, internal medicine, if your specialty is cognitive as opposed to procedural, much of what you do doesn't require the patient to undress in order to for you to provide all the value that you need to assess the patient, to review certain diagnostics, and to make a plan, to prescribe and to adjust with that patient. The relationship can occur without being in the same physical room. If you're, say, an ear, nose, and throat, if you're an interventional cardiologist, your art form, your work is done physically on the patient and with the patient, but there's still an element of follow-up and continuity, much of which can be handled outside of the office, and that's really what COVID has served as an accelerant for. Is every medical specialty finding the ways they can add value outside of the hospital, outside of the clinic, in communicating with the patient, either by video or by email or by text. And every medical specialty is realizing this now and coming around like water over concrete, finding the ways, both to make their economic model work and to add value for patients.
Yeah, I jump on that. I totally agree with Blake. I think the question that the middle market PE groups need to be asking themselves, as well as the operations teams within these clinics, is how can we apply virtual care? Because it is becoming, we've talked about the consumerization of healthcare for decades now. The pandemic has accelerated that, and patients have more choice than ever. Like it's if I need care, primary care, I could go to Teladoc. But the reality is these brick and mortar locations today have an advantage because they own the relationships, and consumers haven't totally adopted and shifted the way they think about care first. And so as these like the operations teams need to be thinking about how can it be applied. And to Blake's point, in some cases it's not appropriate. But at eVisit, we're enabling over 60 different specialty workflows, everything from something as simple as primary care, where they're checking out a low acuity sinus infection, to things as complex as pre and post-op care, and pre and post interaction care around oncology for groups like MD Anderson and Moffitt Cancer Center. And so I think it's really key to just say how. There's not necessarily can, but like where can it be applied? How can we apply it to help increase the operational efficiency of the business?
And like, I was thinking to add, beyond just the regular kind of like seeing your doctor over telehealth, there are opportunities as well to kind of play around the margins and discipline. Like, one of our clients in behavioral health, they instantly moved to telehealth as a large fraction of the business. But, in some of these other disciplines like endocrinology, or, there's a lot of, you can do some of the monitoring remotely using different, kind of different types of products. You can, even just moving to e-health records, if that's, I know a lot of doctors' practices still have kind of physical records or areas you can play kind of around the margin where that will impact all specialties. Although arguably some their core business will be affected, others around the edges are still going to make a difference potentially.
It seems like there are a lot of opportunities in any non-procedural specialties, diagnostic, and even in the procedural ones for pre-op and post-op implementation of virtual care. But the big elephant in the room here is we've heard that reimbursement rates are potentially lower or different for telehealth. What is your perspective on the economics of telehealth? Is this going to make make healthcare providers less profitable, more profitable? How do you think it'll drive unit economics of these businesses?
I'll take a stab at that first. I mean, everything we're seeing from CMS is pointing towards parity, both in what they will pay for and the amounts that they'll pay for. We've been working pretty closely with legislative bodies around that are key decision makers, and the health we all know healthcare has to change at some level. But even if the reimbursement rates are lower, I think there's a broader environment of technology that these groups need to be looking at to drive more efficiency within the practice. I mean, we live in a day and age where I don't actually want to call someone to order anything or to schedule anything. I'd rather, get on my phone and schedule something remotely. It really becomes about the convenience and the experience that we're architecting. And so when if you can find technology or technology provider that can provide a more holistic experience for the patient, and removing additional work in the clinic or operationally, that's key. And I think it's really about creating more bandwidth or more volume. Healthcare, there's greater demand in healthcare than there has ever been, and it's really important that we look at more efficient ways to deliver care. And so, regardless of what happens with reimbursement rates, it's going to be reimbursable. And it's on us as operators to dive in and say, okay, well, where can I create more capacity, more bandwidth? How can I better serve patients? Because you mentioned the 50 plus Teladoc lookalikes. That is happening. It's going to increase. I saw a virtual medical weight loss clinic pop up the other day. That's business out of local healthcare infrastructure pocket. So we need to adapt and change, or, as history shows us, it'll the outcomes will be different for businesses. Not different, they'll be the same. They'll adapt or die.
My view is that, I think there's a potential here that the overall the market could contract a little bit in terms of size 10 years down the road. I mean, on the one hand, you do have, as Brett was mentioning, it's more convenient. So there is probably some pent up demand of people in rural areas, of people with small things, they're going to address it. But on the other hand, a lot of costs in the system is reduced because you don't have people. I think I saw it was like $1,400 per appointment in the emergency room. A lot of that's going to be taken away because people don't go to the emergency room anymore. So longer term, and then you have the potential impact of regulatory loosening, which could result in cost competition. So doctors in areas with lower cost of living can compete. In the longer term, I think it's very possible that the healthcare system becomes more efficient, and that would actually mean worse economics in some ways. But a positive thing as our population ages. Having said that, I think there's a bit of a first mover advantage. If you're able to move quickly in this market, then you can make a lot of money. And so your economics are better. But in the long term, it's possible that the economics are going to be worse. But I don't think we're at that stage yet. But it's interesting to think about this. There are pluses and minuses. But I think anytime competition is introduced into a market, economics are going to get worse for the incumbents.
Agreed. And I think a lot of our audience today are interested in clinical operations. And may have investments in the current delivery system, whether that's urgent care, primary care, specialty care. As long as you have those offices up and running at the pre-pandemic level, with all the staff paid and all the lights turned on and all the bills paid, clinicians there to see fewer patients in person, your economics aren't going to necessarily improve. If you take the marginal capacity argument for telemedicine, which I believe is one of the greatest fallacies. The marginal capacity argument is you've got a big expensive clinic up and running, and if you're at 75% capacity, you can take advantage of the clinician's availability to work in some video visits into the schedule, and that's somehow going to improve your operational economics, and it's not. Your cost per encounter, your cost of running that clinic is the same. whether the clinician is walking into an exam room or running back to their office, probably late, to then try to connect with the patient on video. So that's not going to really move anything for anybody economically. I think the 10-year vision and what a lot of people may be interested in here is that if you think of the thing of value, what's really happening, whether it's a screen or in person, is the clinician is listening to the patient's problem, understanding it, and making a plan for what to do. And in 10 years, if we can think about models where you have, 50% or 25% of the clinical brick and mortar operational space, if you can move all that discovery, the cognitive assessment, the communications between doctors and their patients, if you can move that virtual and only bring people into your clinical space when you need to poke a hole in them, when they come in, there's already a plan. Nobody shows up in the clinic to have their problem listened to for the first time. They arrive there with a doctor's order and already a plan. There's a significant economic shift in clinical operations that I think is the direction that we're ultimately going to go if the right people invest in the right locations.
I don't disagree with the second part of your statement, Blake, but I do with the first. I mean, the ability to drive more capacity, we're seeing it in real time. We have a clinic in Michigan who it's a division of Trinity Health that has 20 providers. They didn't add any additional clinical workforce, but rather identified one specific use case that was more appropriate for virtual care, and their ROI was 10 times. I mean, they increased revenue by 7 figures in 6 months. And so I do think, I think as operators take a closer look at the business, there are areas, I don't think the key there was and that's not that's normal for our customers. The key is to identify very specific use cases where you can transition that care out of the office, and instead of it taking a 10 to 15 minute time block, you can narrow it down to 3 to 5 minutes, because it's a very repeatable issue. It's not something that takes a lot of creative thought, if you will. So,
yeah, I like this debate on the marginal capacity thing. I agree in the short run, if you have excess capacity, kind of gobble that up, then you're definitely going to recognize a pretty fast ROI. But if you're able to do it, if your marginal cost on these things is call like $50 an appointment versus like 75 before, and then your pricing, like maybe the pricing is flat on the reimbursement side, but people are going to wise up to that on the insurance side, on Medicare side, and they're going to start hammering that down. So I agree. I mean, it depends on whether you're in kind of short term or long term. In the short to medium term, you can juice your utilization, get your EBITDA up, flip your company. It's fantastic. In the long term, I could see those reimbursement rates, the government eventually wisens up to it and says, okay, you know what, rates are going to be cut because it doesn't cost as much. I mean, I'm from Ontario in Canada. We've got like ophthalmologists who've been billing tons for these procedures. It used to take a long time and now barely take anything. And so they're some of the highest earners in the province, but they've wisened up to that and they're starting to crack down. So, you kind of see this impact eventually, but it's a tough decision. And as a business owner, you're going to say, should I use up that excess capacity or should I not? I'd say you probably should for now. You're not responsible for the market. The market will do what it does. I mean, you're 0.5% of the market or whatever. So it's an interesting debate.
Yeah, it brings up some really good points. And what I'm hearing is it sounds like there are true economic efficiencies and gains in the short to mid run. And it's a question mark of how that'll reach equilibrium in the long run with reimbursements adjusting past our stage of CMS parity. So let's say I'm convinced that this is an interesting route for me to take my provider, which I have already invested in as a portfolio or that I'm considering and underwriting a deal on. What are some considerations I have to take for actually implementing virtual care at my provider facility? And, what does it take to do this and do this right?
So, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Rob. I can jump in. So this is what we do, right? Like we look at existing provider groups and we help enable them virtually. And I think one of the big mistakes that I've seen, like a common things, especially in smaller groups, not the large health systems per se, is that the belief that you leave it just hand it to the providers and they'll figure it out. And at providers, we train providers to show up to an exam room when a patient's been placed there. So one of the key points is having a strategy on the offset of how to actually operationally implement the program. Like, what are your standards of care? Just like what your standards of care are, what are your rules of engagement around how quickly do you respond to patients? How do you get patients to the virtual exam room? When should they be there? The reality is a lot of it is outside of the medical provider and really more placed on the administrative staff. What's the strategy to drive volume and patient engagement and awareness? Those are all questions that at eVisit we help answer during the sales process. But I found that when groups come in with a strategy around how to drive it as a core piece of their business, it solves a lot of the questions we asked in the previous question, but it really drives a better experience. And I think it's key that it's not you build it and they will come. You don't just roll up a telemedicine solution and they're there. And the second thing is choosing a platform. We've seen with the advent of the pandemic, there's a big difference between two-way video and virtual care. There's a big difference between just the experience and what's required. When you're looking at two-way video solutions to facilitate care, it requires 5 or 6 people in the value chain to get that together: billing, admin, scheduling, IT, the clinician themselves, sometimes a nurse practitioner, and then the patient, right? But when you have an all-encompassing platform that can help supplement those sections, it requires 1 or 2 people, two or three people at most: the patient, the physician, and sometimes an admin who's scheduling. But finding the right solution is the key question, and then the strategy behind it is just as important.
Yeah, I like Brett's comment about the fact that someone has to take ownership, and it's probably not the clinicians. They're probably already overloaded. It's not going to be their top priority. But I mean, in terms of a private equity firm, assuming with call it a private equity firm buying a company, a healthcare services company that's not really telehealth enabled, I mean, it really comes down to a traditional financial modeling exercise or a business case, and looking at what are the costs and the benefits. I mean, on the revenue side, Brett already mentioned you're gobbling up that marginal capacity. That in the short term, that's probably a great thing. Like, I mean, nobody in this market is a market pricer. Nobody's setting the price for the market. They're just taking the market. So in that case, you probably should just try to pick up as much utilization as you can. The other thing to think about is what your competitors are doing. So if your competitors are doing it, they're going to and you are not, then they're going to start to gobble away some of your patient base who feel like you're left in the 20th century. And then there's costs, right? And I think I don't know what the costs are, Brett and Blake. I'm sure you can talk comprehensively about that, but there is a cost to it on an upfront basis in terms of software. But then there's other costs like purchasing webcams and maybe getting a better internet line and a bunch of other things, training. So all these considerations really do go into your financial model, and you pump out a number and you kind of make your decision and move with it. So I'm really talking from the finance kind of private equity value creation side, but that's what I would think about.
Yeah, the big move is I mean, if you can make providers a little bit more efficient, there's obviously going to be margin in that, and somebody's always going to be interested in that very small amount of margin across a very large industry. And if you look back pre-pandemic, people have been trying to get clinicians doing video visits for a long, long time, and our fundamental assumption is that the economic unit, the unit of value of the doctor's appointment, the visit, is very inefficient. It always has been. People say, I hate going to the doctor. And the reason they say that is often because of the clunky experience. And so when we endeavor to just replicate that old thing online, you're gonna bring forward a lot of the old clunky UX elements. Here's a clipboard, fill it out. There are companies who are replicating that clipboard online and getting the same old experience. The medical practice of the future is, I believe, going to be more of a deconstructed relationship where the access is ongoing. We solve for the economics on the back end of it, whether it's a PMPM or a lower per visit fee. But ultimately, the great hope for telemedicine is that we will significantly reduce costs. And that's doable as long as we don't try to bring forward all the old inefficiencies of the legacy doctor's visit.
So taking another spin on this, what's been quite popular in the healthcare provider space with private equity firms is industry consolidation and deploying a roll-up strategy. You don't just buy one dental clinic, you buy 10, 20, 100. It's the same dental, urgent care, physical therapy, behavioral health. How do you think telemedicine and virtual care will impact the ability of an investor to consolidate in a space? Does it make it easier? Does having this infrastructure backbone make it harder? And what are some of the considerations that they should have while evaluating a consolidation opportunity in the virtual care space?
Like my view on this, we work with a lot of our work honestly is in the healthcare roll-up space right now. I actually don't think it makes that much of a difference. I think in terms of doing the consolidation, you're mostly buying companies that are bricks and mortar. The bulk of their business is bricks and mortar. You're buying them for their client base, which is centered around a physical location. I don't think it makes a huge difference in terms of speeding up consolidation or drastically changing the business case for these acquisitions. But I do think that the telehealth opportunity is a key plank in any good value creation plan today. So if I'm going to buy those 10 clinics, I have to add value. And the amount of value you're adding, this is not like venture capital where you're going to grow the thing from 10 million to 200 million revenues per year. For a single practice under this healthcare roll-up, if you can bump revenues by 10, 20%, if you can cut costs by 10, 20%, that's an extra, call it 40% on the EBITDA line, and multiply that by 6 times, 8 times as a multiplier. That's pretty good dollars. And so telehealth might be playing around with the margins for a lot of these businesses. By margins, I mean 10, 20, 30%. But that can be a huge piece. And that's, there you're going to get your 10, 15, 20, 30% IRRs on your investors' capital. So I don't think it's going to speed consolidation considerably. I think it does open up kind of gives you one more tool in your tool belt to add value. And I think a lot of firms sometimes struggle with that. And it's a pretty straightforward one. And that's the nice thing on healthcare roll-up is straightforward. I don't think it'll speed things that much, but I think there's lots of money to be made. I'll put it that way.
So I'll take a bit of a contrarian view on that, only because I think if you're thinking about it from a traditional just acquisition, and you're trying to market grab, I may see that. But I think if you're thinking about it, the goal of urgent care, it's a referral system, right? It's supposed to be quick, more convenient care, but ultimately you're seeing these large health systems buy up urgent cares, and there's a reason. When you're losing $150,000 per provider per year in ambulatory, why do you keep buying those? It's market share, right? You're trying to get I think the stat I read was the goal is to get within a 10-mile radius. Like you can capture patients within a 10-mile radius of that location. You're spending, if you're building it net new, you're spending $750,000 to $1.5 million to spin that up in the first year. But if you think about it less as your physical footprint and more as your virtual footprint, and you allocate some of those dollars you would have used to purchase to marketing to patients and creating a brand in a market, you can absolutely drive abnormal or growth in that sector. So a lot of the things we talk with our customers about is, hey, instead of opening one up every 10 miles, do it every 30. It's still close enough, or every 15 or every 20. Like you drive some efficiency or purchase in those locations, and then allocate those dollars towards marketing to patients to make them aware of where they can access care, which is from their living room, right? And so you're gonna grow your business. It's cheaper to add, more extenders into those locations than hiring physicians. No offense, Blake, but you can create more capacity without having to add more exam rooms and driving patients towards especially in urgent care. I mean, I think it's about 67% of those procedures could or should have happened in primary care and are low acuity and don't need hands-on. So you can drive a lot more volume and have a footprint over the entire geographic location, within however long it takes you to implement the technology.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to talk multiplication, your platform and your modality have to be a consideration. A doctor doing serial video visits where I sit in front of my computer and I do video visit, video visit, video visit. It assumes that you can line the patients up that tightly, that the physician can stay on time, that the patients don't abandon the online waiting room, and that you can achieve some level of efficiency. When you deconstruct it all apart, like we do, and take the asynchronous communication approach, where patients chat whenever they want, and doctors are chatting with multiple patients at the same time. You take these traditional, serial visits, where a doctor, the most efficient doctor out there, even on telemedicine, is hitting 4.5 patients an hour, maybe. And you multiply that into a 7 or 8 patients per hour, with the same value, with the same or higher resolution rate, better customer experience. Then you're taking your provider workforce and you're lowering your cost per encounter, which we found is the most important number when it comes to our economic efficiency.
I would agree with that. I think what we're seeing on our asynchronous workflows is we're seeing the same thing, that they can do it in between patients, as well as they can bulk load it into a 15-minute break if they have one. I'd totally agree with that.
Could I ask a question, Brett and Blake? I think for our audience, the interesting question will be, what's the penetration right now of telehealth in a practice that adopts it, like kind of in terms of a ramp up curve? It's obviously skewed by COVID. And then what do you think the kind of steady state penetration will be for, kind of the range from, call it like 10 to 30% of the patient base, or, what do you think of that? Because that's going to be kind of a key input as they make decisions about this stuff.
Yeah, so I like to talk about the telemedicine ground game and the telemedicine air game. If I'm a primary care physician and I have a panel of 3,000 patients, and I implement some telemedicine, well, now I'm going to take some of my visits out of the clinic, and I'm going to have those same patients, some of them seeing me virtually. I'm not making myself necessarily more efficient, because I've got my same, even if the telemedicine visit is more efficient for me, I've still got my same panel of users. Where you drive efficiency is with volume. That's the telemedicine air game, is you take large populations, you take staffed services, and patients are able to come in and be seen quickly. And the doctors always have patients who they can see. And that's the real lever, is in adding volume to an efficient physician, which is tough to do when you're running a traditional clinic, where your panel is the same as it always has been.
Rob, repeat the question again.
I was just curious, like what, let's say you have 1,000 patients, like what fraction of either patients or visits would you expect kind of over? I mean, COVID's obviously accelerated it, but it's not necessarily clear that all of that will persist. Like, what's the kind of penetration rate today from COVID in the practice that is newly adopting telehealth, and where do you think it'll stabilize?
I think so. A practice most practices newly adopted telehealth last March, right? We've been growing at a steady clip of helping practices adopt, but you saw a massive boom in March of last year. And what we saw was about, they lost some procedures, right? Like we cut off elective procedures, meaning a lot of the US, we stopped doing certain things to keep patients and providers safe. But when you look at the reimbursement, like the percentage of procedures that were reimbursed, it went to about 50% at the peak of the pandemic. And then it's dropped to like as low as 15% as things kind of calm down. It's hovering back around 21% right now. And as we're talking with analysts and different groups, what they believe is that it'll normalize around 30% at scale. And that's heavily weighted within certain specialties. I know behavioral health has adopted like greater than 50%, whereas there are certain specialties who haven't adopted at all. We saw customers, not our customers, we saw clinics in the sales process who actually went out of business in the middle of it just because they weren't prepared to adopt quickly and they didn't adapt. And a lot of healthcare practices are financially precarious situation anyway. But so I think that's what we're seeing from a reimbursement rate, like not rate, but the number of procedures that are being reimbursed. And that's what the data is telling us on this side. I hope it's true. I'd love to see it normalize at 30%. I think it's something that's needed for patient and provider time and efficiency and patient outcomes.
And we're just getting up on time, so I'm going to move to the final question. As we wrap up here, the data tells us that most of the telehealth companies out there are still founder owned, about 95% of them. And so you probably get a lot of emails from and calls from investors, investment bankers, asking you to have the conversation. And I know we have a lot of business development professionals in the audience who are curious about this. What messaging really resonates with you as you get that email from an investor, banker, and what really makes you compelled to respond and have that meeting? Any advice for the audience I think would be really helpful as they think about getting excited about this space and getting in touch with more business owners, making their messaging more effective will go a long way.
So that is my job, right? Part of my job as CEO is to field those conversations, to build those relationships. I think we just wrapped up our quarterly kind of couple days of investor conversations. We do it every quarter to keep our network up to date on where we're going and how things are progressing. I think one of the things that I won't know the business you're reaching out to. You know, when I get a cold email, and they detail for me exactly what I do, it's a lot more compelling because I can tell they've actually researched the market. They have a thesis. They know what they're talking about. I mean, I had a call this week where, you know, I was surprised. I don't know why, but I had to explain everything about the market and then our business model, which I should be explaining about the business model, but everything about the market from the national provider networks down to the single clinic groups down to the brick and mortar plus telemedicine. And so for me, what's always compelling is when someone knows the market, right? Like I don't have to start from square one. We can have a really informed conversation and they can challenge me. They can push back on some assumptions we're making and I can defend those. And rather than say, 3 centuries ago, medical doctors arrived on the scene. And then like it helps to advance the conversation more quickly. Yep.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing that, if you're not familiar with healthcare, if you're not familiar with the frustrations of the landscape, you got to buckle your chin strap. If you're from tech and you think that you can come and solve for healthcare, please come. Temper your expectations and be ready. Healthcare is large, and what the downfall or the closure of Amazon, Berkshire, Chase, Haven company has I hope shown everybody is that it's hard to eat an elephant, and you can do it, but it's slow and chewy and frustrating, hard to digest. So that's healthcare. If I had one analogy, that eating an elephant is doable, but it's a lot of work.
Thanks everyone for the time. This has been great. And your contact information will be shared with participants who may want to reach out and further the conversation. Thank you all for everything today.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Guys.